So, hello, welcome back. It's day 2 at Edie Live, and we are back on the Mission Possible sofa. This is a safe place where some of our speakers can just have a kind of candid discussion around sustainability and some of the topics that they will be focusing on or have focused on as part of their sessions. So, joining me this morning, we have Steve Kenzie, the Executive Director of UN Global Compact Network for the UK. We have Gudrun Cartwright, who is the Environment Director at Business in the Community, and Rosanna Cole, who is a lecturer in Sustainable Supply Chain Management at Surrey Business School. So thank you all for coming along. I realise the middle of day 2 is quite a hectic time to grab everyone, so thank you for agreeing to come. And Rosie, I want to start with you. You're doing a session on supply chains for circularity later on, and I saw you sitting in on the keynote theatre that Steve was talking on. So what have you taken so far from the day, and what are you most looking forward to about your session as well?
What I've taken from the 2 days that I've been here is really about extended producer responsibility, or extending that to kind of product ownership. So a lot of the larger firms that are producing, especially, there's a lot of plastics conversations going around over the last 2 days, that firm would then own those items, from end to end, so real circularity, which I do agree with, but I also I work quite a lot in behavioural intervention with consumers as well. So I think there are some views that the large firms are obviously in a position, in a very strong position, to be able to push that extended producer responsibility if they so wish, and actually change the behaviour of consumers. But there's also quite a lot to be done in policy. And there's other interventions that we can do through some kind of psychology type work in terms of trying to change consumer behaviour with some help from some of the multinationals. So I think it's more of a joint effort than perhaps just the sole responsibility of one group.
And speaking of joint efforts, Steve, I think that's a good time to bring you in. A discussion on the keynote earlier, day 2 on the keynote period is all about SDGs. How was the discussion there? Were SDGs still these kind of big, lofty ambitions that perhaps scared a few businesses, or are we all starting to embrace them as a real opportunity now?
I wouldn't want to generalize on that. We had a poll asking the audience if they had mapped their activities against the goals yet, and 65% said they had. Some numbers said they didn't know, and there were a significant chunk had not done so. So that is a concern, and it speaks to Rosie's point about wider awareness of this agenda. We're at a sustainable business conference, and still a third of attendees are not even on the first step. So that is a concern. At the same time, happy to see that a majority are embracing this agenda and moving in that direction. So what's the generalization? There's work to be done, and I think it's a challenge for organizations like ours to offer sort of bespoke guidance so that we're not leaving the leaders to fight it out on their own, at the same time not leaving the laggards, again, to figure it out for themselves. So we need to find ways of making this agenda accessible so the organizations and consumers and the citizens that are just coming into it aren't intimidated and put off by the challenge being just too great. And at the same time, we need to work with the leaders to keep on giving us those positive examples and showing what can be done, and that, in fact, this agenda is achievable if we could all just get behind it.
It seems like we're at a really good time to be able to perhaps start redefining what those kind of leadership targets look like. Gudrun, you blogged for us quite recently on the climate strikes, Extinction Rebellion protests, and basically how that can really act as a rallying call for businesses to start mobilising. I think since then, actually, like Ecotricity have set that net zero target for 2025 ridiculously early, all things considered. So we are starting to see that public awareness around things like climate change, obviously plastics and the circular economy comes into it as well, is now mobilising businesses to act perhaps out a bit of a fear of kind of consumer loyalty and customer trust. But do you see the climate strikes and just, I suppose, a general greater awareness amongst citizens around climate change as a real opportunity for business?
I mean, absolutely. I think, we all interact with businesses every day in our lives, and I think what we're finding, particularly with Extinction Rebellion, is they started off with a very general claim, but then a week after that they started talking about fashion and let's not buy anything new for a year. At the weekend they wrote an open letter to the advertising industry. So actually, Greenpeace have been busy this week as well. So actually this whole looking at what's coming, the public awareness is huge. And the young people as well, really, mobilising every Friday. They're not giving up yet. They're still going really strong. So I think business leaders are starting to listen to that and think, well, actually, these are our customers. They're our employees of the future. How are we going to make that happen? I mean, Skanska is another example that came out with the net zero carbon target recently as well. Not quite as soon as the other one, but it's there. And I think the challenge is going to be for businesses to understand what their contribution can be and to speak about it in a way that is sort of authentic. So, one of the things that came out of our recent insights report from our tracker was a risk of purpose wash. So lots of companies have a purpose, they're talking about it, they're doing it, but how far is that embedded in the business? So it's kind of that sort of translating intention into really good action and communicating it well.
There's perhaps some lessons and parallels to be had from the plastics debate that's been probably kind of rolling on for about 18 months now since that Blue Planet effect. We had a session yesterday, I think it was Hugo Tagholm from Surfers Against Sewage said that actually Blue Planet only had 14 minutes dedicated to plastic pollution, but it caused so much change. And Rosie, I want to come back to you on that. We're much more mature business approach to plastics in comparison to aspects like the climate emergency where it's still in its infancy. But I'm sure there's lessons to be learned from how businesses responded to plastics. There were general kind of sweeping phase outs all set, but we're now starting to see, as you mentioned earlier, with producer responsibilities and aspects like that, the thought process isn't quite there yet. So where would you like to see the plastics debate kind of evolve and go to next?
I would like to see a refill culture is where I'd like to see the plastics debate go, and so this is where I tend to contradict myself, where I say, let's not put all the responsibility on those main leaders. However, if anybody is going to be able to change retailers, to change their store design, to get refill stations in that will influence and persuade and encourage consumers to, and I particularly am talking about toiletries, to change an actual behaviour whereby people bring their plastics back in for a refill culture. That's where I would really like to see some of the influence be put in with retailers that can then have a change in consumer behaviour. We had a part in Steve's session about how in some developing countries that's not possible with the disposable income problem, but certainly for us in this country, we still have a plastics problem, and something like instilling a refill culture could definitely help in that area.
And Steve, I just want to touch back on the SDGs. It seems like climate awareness and plastic pollution have really caught the public's imagination. Can businesses start using these as a gateway to perhaps some of the other global goals that perhaps are a little kind of further from the mind?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the key features of the global goals is their interconnectedness. Even if you wanted to cherry pick one goal and only work on that, you can't help but impact other goals, either positively or negatively, by your actions you're taking on the one. And this came up again in the session about the shampoo sachets, and there's an economic driver there because in poorer countries people just can't afford to buy a bottle of shampoo. They need to buy a single-use sachet. So we have a poverty goal 1 issue that's having knock-on effects on sustainable consumption and production goal 12 issue, and life below water with the plastic waste. It's all interconnected, and this is the great thing about the goals. If we can make progress on poverty, we start to create an enabling environment to reduce pollution from plastics. And if we do it as an affluent country in the UK, we can start to create the economic conditions. We can make biodegradable packaging economically viable by creating demand for it here, and then they can transfer it into markets where it wouldn't be economically viable yet on its own. So it's all about that holistic commitment. And just regarding plastics and the power of it, and I think that there's a really important lesson there for sustainability more generally. 2 years ago, a manufacturer of plastic straws would have been thinking life is good, and they would have been carrying on thinking we can get away with being an unsustainable company. People buying plastic straws thinking no problem, away we go, and boom, just like that, companies are going to be seriously impacted if that was a key product for them. Companies that were using plastic straws need to find new suppliers, but now they're competing quite hard, I think, to get those sustainable suppliers, because before the market for paper straws was pretty small, and now all of a sudden everybody fighting for that production. The companies that were ahead of the curve, that were committed to being sustainability before they were pushed, have a real competitive advantage now. So I think we need to start applying that kind of vision to the whole agenda. Where are we exposed? Where is the next big tipping point change going to be? How are we going to prepare for that and be future ready as a company?
Sounds like the kind of successful business leadership of tomorrow involves a lot of horizon scanning in that sense, and a lot of kind of flexibility and ability to respond when these kind of crises hit, but also, like you said, be ahead of the curve. And just to finish on, Edie Live this year is all about turning ambition into action. So I'd like to get from all of you a kind of, it might be a personal ambition, it might be one from your organisation, but a ambition regarding sustainability that you really want to focus on, that you think, over the next, however many months, I can really start to accelerate towards and make some real tangible change. So Rosie, if we start with you on that one.
I think my ambition into action will be something to do with the time dynamic, so something we haven't talked about just here, but that is coming up. We look at time when it comes to the SDGs and our kind of targets and the times that we have, but where we need to focus more, I think, is on the timing of, for example, how long a CEO or a new sustainability director has to prove themselves in a new role, let's say 100 days. Now, sustainability is a long-term goal, right? So these don't match up very well. So one kind of power that we do have within universities is publishing research, and research that hopefully businesses take on board and can do something with. So for me, to keep pushing that time agenda, and making it more feasible, whereby someone actually could someone in a powerful position could make a change, and a good sustainable change. That's where I would push my ambition into action.
Great, and Steve, same question for you.
We spoke about it in the last session, and it's about outside-in goal setting. So it's great to see companies ambitious and setting goals and wanting to change their performance on sustainability, but I think when I want to encourage companies to look outside the company and be inspired by the global goals and what is needed to be achieved, rather than looking inward and setting goals based on what is easy to achieve. So it's about raising ambition to meet these external goals that have been set by the world, really, and to take those on.
I think for me, it's how do we translate some of these big complicated things into the tangible, practical things that every business can do. So if you take net zero carbon, that's kind of almost come out of nowhere. Last year we were all about science-based targets. All of a sudden now we're net zero carbon. But what does that actually mean? Do we have a clear definition? What do companies do? How do we all work together? And then what are the things that you can do right now that are going to start making that difference, but within the context of what you've both said about, we need to think in terms of timescales, we need to think about what's outside going on informing us, so that we're starting to make that practical action that's going to change things.
Okay guys, that was a really in-depth discussion. Left me with a lot of stuff to mull over as well, so thank you, and do enjoy the rest of the show as well.
Thank you.
Cheers.